Hey there, CMA candidates. I'm your coach, and today we're diving into a brand new explainer on a topic that honestly trips up a ton of test takers on part 1 of the exam. We're talking about mastering fixed and variable overhead costs. Look, I know overhead sounds like that boring, generic bucket where business costs just go to hide, but understanding how these costs actually behave is the secret key to mastering variance analysis, budgeting, and decision-making. If you get this down today, you're going to breeze through a massive chunk of your cost management section. Here's our playbook for today. We're going to decode overhead basics, master variable overhead, master fixed overhead, and wrap it all up with the ultimate exam matrix.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Decoding Overhead Basics.
We've got to stop treating overhead like it's just some generic bucket of random expenses. What exactly is overhead? Simply put, these are the necessary costs required to run your business that you just can't draw a direct straight line to a specific unit of production. It's basically the background machinery of your entire operation.
Which brings us to an absolutely crucial point, the golden rule. Overhead is always indirect. So we aren't talking about the raw leather used to make a shoe, right? And we aren't talking about the chef making a specific meal. We're talking about things like the factory rent, keeping a roof over your head, or a production supervisor's salary. It's completely necessary, but it's indirect.
Moving on to Section 2, Mastering Variable Overhead. Okay, let's split overhead into two distinct personalities, starting with variable overhead, or VOH for short. Now pay really close attention to the behavioral split here. This is the exact trick the examiners absolutely love to test you on. You have to separate how the cost acts in total versus how it acts per unit. In total, variable overhead moves directly in tandem with your volume. If you produce 10% more, your total variable overhead goes up by exactly 10%. But look at the per unit side. That cost stays perfectly constant.
Let's make this super concrete. For example, imagine machine electricity costs exactly $2 to make one single widget. Well, if you ramp up production and run that machine longer to make 10 widgets, it's going to cost you $20. The total cost absolutely changed, right? It went from $2 up to $20. But that $2 per unit cost? No way. It never budged.
So, what does this actually look like on test day? When you see these common examples pop up on the exam, things like machine electricity or power, indirect materials like the glue, oil, or cleaning supplies used in the factory, or even lubricants for the manufacturing equipment, I want you to immediately anchor to the rule. The total changes, but the unit cost stays perfectly constant.
Let's flip the coin for Section 3, Mastering Fixed Overhead.
You really want to pay close attention here, because this is where a lot of candidates make silly mistakes under pressure. With fixed overhead, or FOH, the behavior is literally the exact opposite of what we just learned. Your total cost stays completely constant within your normal operating capacity, what accountants like to call the relevant range. But look at the per unit cost. It actually decreases as your production volume goes up. And this brilliantly illustrates what we call spreading the overhead. Let's say your monthly factory rent is $10,000. That drops from a seriously painful $10 grand per unit if you make just one single widget, all the way down to a highly efficient $1 per unit if you crank out 10,000 widgets. The total rent didn't budge at all. It's still $10,000, but the per unit cost absolutely plummeted.
You've got to watch out for these classic fixed overhead examples on the test: factory rent or property taxes, factory supervisor salaries, and straight-line depreciation on factory equipment. Just remember, a factory supervisor gets paid the exact same total salary whether the production line is completely swamped with a massive backlog or totally dead.
All right, bringing it all together in Section 4, the ultimate exam matrix. I really want you to burn this matrix into your brain. If you memorize this perfectly symmetrical 2x2 cheat sheet and jot it down on your scratch paper the literal second you sit down at the testing center, you are going to be unstoppable. Notice the beautiful symmetry here? They do the exact opposite of each other. The exam creators know that our brains naturally want to think of costs on a per unit basis. So they'll try to trick you by saying something like, production increased by 20%, therefore fixed overhead per unit increased. But looking at this matrix, you know that is completely false. If production increases, fixed overhead per unit decreases. You will never fall for that trap again.
So now that you've got this foolproof mental model locked in, I want to leave you with a critical question to ponder before your next study session. How will you apply these exact cost behaviors to master standard costing and variance analysis? Really think about it.
How will variable overhead spinning variances behave differently from fixed overhead volume variances? Because let me tell you, that is where the CMA exam really puts this foundation to the test. Take this framework, go hit your test bank, and keep that incredible momentum going. You've totally got this.